too, the quilt was heavy that night. I remember that, the weight of it across my legs, the way the lamp threw yellow light against the far wall. He had already gone to bed. The house was the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the mattress and I thought, I should feel something, but I didn't. I had stopped feeling things the way you stop noticing a door that never opens slowly. Then all at once. My name is Rebecca, and this is a space for women who grew up in worlds where certain things didn't have names. If that finds something in you, I'd be glad to have you here. Subscribe and stay close. And I want to ask you something in the comments. Was there ever a word in your life that held more than it showed? I was 22 years old the first time he said it. We had been married for 4 months. It was an evening in late October. I remember because the garden had just gone brown and the smell of turned earth was still coming through the kitchen window. I had spoken at dinner, not loudly, not to argue. I had simply said that I thought the new bishop's ruling on propane heaters seemed harsh for the older families in the district. I said it quietly. The way you say a thing you believe. He set down his fork. He looked at me. Rebecca, he said. Correction. Then he picked his fork back up. That was all. No raised voice, no long sermon, just the word, flat and certain, the way you'd say pass the salt. And I want to be honest with you. I was not frightened. I was not even hurt, not the way you might expect. I straightened in my chair. I felt my face go still and I thought, he's right. I spoke out of place. That is what I thought. I tell you that not to make you feel sorry for me, but because I need you to understand what the ground was like inside me then. It was not broken ground. It was very, very flat. I had grown up knowing this word. Correction was not a punishment in our community, or rather, it was not only a punishment, it was a form of care. The Ordnung, the set of rules our community lived by, was not meant to be cruel. It was meant to order life so that the soul could rest. Husbands were responsible for their households before God. That responsibility included guidance. It included, when necessary, correction. My mother had been corrected. My grandmother before her. This was not a secret thing. It was simply part of the shape of a life. The way a fence is part of a field. What I didn't know yet, and I want you to hold this question, because I won't answer it all at once, is that there is a word that sits very close to correction. A word that looks nearly the same from a distance. Wears the same quiet face, uses the same flat tone. I didn't know that word then. I would not know it for years. What I knew that October evening was that I had stepped outside a boundary, and my husband had named it, and the correct response was to step back inside, so I did, and I felt strangely grateful. The months after our wedding were genuinely tender in many ways. He was not a cold man. He worked hard, rose before dawn, never complained about a meal. On Sunday evenings he read aloud from the Bible and his voice was low and steady. And I would sit across from him mending something and think, this is good, this is what a life is. The corrections came rarely at first. Maybe once a month, a word spoken too freely at a frolic, a question asked in front of his father, a small dissent noted and addressed. Each time, I adjusted. I thought of it the way you think of learning to drive. You correct the wheel. You stay on the road. There was a morning, I think it was our second spring, when I stood at the kitchen window with my tea and watched a cardinal land on the fence post. Just for a second, it landed and then it was gone, and I had the strangest thought, quick as the bird I used to sing while I cooked. I didn't know when I had stopped. I stood there trying to remember, and I couldn't. The tea went cold in my hands. Then I heard him come down the stairs and I turned and smiled and began making his breakfast. And I did not think about the singing again for a long time. I was happy then. Or I was too tired to know the difference. My closest friend in those years was a woman named Sarah. We had grown up together, sat beside each other at singings, made each other's wedding quilts. Sarah was brighter than me, louder in the best possible way. She laughed from her stomach. One afternoon, we were shelling beans on her porch and she said without looking up, Daniel doesn't correct me, you know. He just talks to me. I kept shelling. I said, that's nice. But something in me went very still. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. So I placed it somewhere far back and covered it over. The way you put a stone in a drawer because it's interesting, but you don't know yet what it is. By the time we had been married 3 years, the corrections had changed shape. They were no longer just words at the dinner table. A correction was a silence that lasted 2 days. A correction was the way he left a room when I entered it, for reasons I was never given. A correction was waking at night and understanding, from nothing but the stillness beside me, that I had done something wrong and having no name for what. I would lie there in the dark and try to inventory myself. What did I say? What did I do? What did I forget? I could never find the answer. I stopped looking for it. I stopped asking questions. I stopped. I didn't know what I was feeling, so I stopped feeling it. The quilt was still heavy. That is what I remember from that night I described, not anger. Not clarity, just weight, and for years that is what I carried, not a wound I could point to. Not a story I could tell at a frolic or whisper to Sarah over beans, just weight, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that becomes so familiar you stop calling it heavy and start calling it you. Years pass the way years do inside a life that looks, from the outside, entirely correct. The house was clean, the children came, the garden turned and grew and turned again. And I moved through all of it careful and quiet, a woman who had learned, without anyone teaching her, how small to make herself. My daughter was 9 years old when it happened. She had said something at the table, something small, an opinion about a neighbor's new barn, something a child says without thinking, and I watched my husband set down his fork. I watched his face go still. I heard him say her name, low and measured, and I saw her face change. It was not fear exactly, it was something quieter than fear. It was the beginning of disappearing, that careful tucking away of yourself, that starts so young you don't even know you're doing it. I had seen that look before, I had worn it, but I had never seen it from the outside. I sat very still, something cracked open in me slowly, the way ice cracks in early March, not breaking, just giving way. I did not say anything that night, I want to be honest about that. I cleared the dishes, I put the children to bed, I folded laundry in the bedroom, and I did not speak, and neither did he. And the silence was the usual kind, the kind I had long since learned to breathe inside. But something was different now, something was awake. There was a question sitting in me that I had managed for 9 years to keep asleep. What is this exactly? Not the marriage, not the man. The specific thing that happened at dinner tables and in silences and in the careful way I had learned to enter a room. I did not have an answer yet, but for the first time I could feel the shape of the question. I started, privately, going back. Not with anger, I want to be clear about that, with something more like a woman who finds an old box in the attic and decides, finally, to open it. I went back to the first correction, the fork set down, the flat voice. I went back to the singing I had stopped without noticing, the cardinal on the fence post, the stone I had put in a drawer after Sarah's was on the porch. I spread them all out in my mind, the way you spread quilt pieces on a floor before you sew them together, and I looked at the pattern they made, and the pattern had a name. Just wasn't ready to say it yet. I saw Sarah that summer. Years had passed since we'd had real time together. The way life does that, pulling women apart with distance and children, and the full weight of living. We walked along the road behind her property, and she told me quietly that things in her marriage were not easy either. Different from mine, not corrections, but other silences, other shapes. And she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, I think we were all handed a language that had certain words missing from it. And you can only name what you have a word for. We walked the rest of the way without speaking. The sky was the pale, used-up blue of late July. I thought about all the things I had experienced that I had simply filed under hard because I had no other drawer to put them in. I loved my community. I need you to know that, not as a disclaimer but as a truth that sits alongside everything else I am telling you. The singings on Sunday evenings, 30 voices in a barn, no instruments, breath and harmony, and the old words of the Ausbund rising up into the rafters. The way women arrived at a neighbor's door without being called when there was illness or grief, arms full ready. The belonging that is so deep it becomes your bones. I loved all of it, I love it still, and some things inside that same life caused me harm. Not because anyone meant them to, but because meaning well and causing harm are not, it turns out, opposites. Both things were true. Both things are true, and holding both of them at once, that was the hardest thing I ever learned to do. The word I finally gave it was not abuse. That word felt too large, too loud, too certain for something that had lived so quietly inside my life. The word I gave it was smaller and, I think, more honest. Control, not the cruel kind, not the kind that announces itself, the kind that wears the face of love, the kind that is handed down through generations by people who genuinely believed they were doing right. He was not a monster. He was a man who had been taught that to love a woman was to shape her. He had never been asked to question that, neither had I. We were both inside the same story. We had both been handed the same missing words. Naming it didn't make me feel free. Made me feel the exact size of what I had been carrying. I think about Gelassenheit, the word we used for surrender, for yielding, for the letting go that our faith asked of us. I was taught to yield myself, to release my own will as an act of devotion. I believed in that. I still find something true in it. But what I understand now, sitting in a room that is mine, in a life I have slowly, carefully rebuilt, what I understand is that yielding yourself to God and yielding yourself to silence are not the same surrender. One opens you. One closes you. If you are holding a word in your own life, something you have been calling by the wrong name for a long time because it was the only name you had, I want you to know that you are not wrong for beginning to look at it. The looking is not disloyalty. The looking is how you find your way back to yourself. Knowing doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it just feels like finally being real.